Hi, we're Two Souls, and we found a hidden gem that we're going to talk to you about. Literally an hour into it, you and I are like, we got to talk about this.
Like, it's super kinetic. It's like there's a rhythm to it. And when it comes to the bosses, you could tell they like focused on like pushing them and making them like as hard as they could while still making it doable.
Hi, we're Two Souls, and welcome to On the Games. My name is George O'Mara, joined by my co-host, Mark O'Mara.
Hello.
How you doing today?
Pretty good.
Pretty good. Yeah. Little changes, you know, we're just making little changes. We got some camera movements, you know.
The double shot earlier was so nice, dude. The coffee.
It was a triple shot, actually.
Was it a triple shot?
Yeah.
Oh,
Don't
dude,
say where we got it from, though.
I'm feeling that one, dude.
We don't want to say that, because then we'll start saying where we got our triple shot from once we start getting some money from them. Once we start collecting them checks. Yeah, you heard me.
It was good, though. I would go again.
I just might.
Did you want to?
Yeah, we'll figure that out.
We'll figure that out. I'm down.
So,
I'm down.
This week,
Yes.
you know, we're playing a little Helldivers 2. All three of us have been squadding up. It's been really good.
Yes.
But then, like, we got to downloading some games while we're waiting for some other games for Helldivers to download. And we came across a little gem, a little diamond in the rough. Is it Thymesea or Thymesea?
I've heard it both ways.
Yeah. It's in the south, they say Thymesea, and then in the north, they say Thymesea. So we came across this Bloodborne, Dark Souls kind of game.
It reminded me more of Sekiro.
Sekiro kind of game.
Yeah.
It's called Thymesea. We're
It's
going to call it that.
It's like Sekiro if it had Bloodborne-esque, like, aesthetic.
Yeah. Yeah. And we ended up downloading it because we saw it in the PlayStation Plus catalog.
We had heard about it, too, for a little while. But, like, it was a game where when it came out, like, I feel like it had a nice bit of, like, you know, trailers and stuff. Because I do remember there being, like, a nice marketing scheme for it. And then it kind of just came out. I think it came out around the time, like, there was, like, Bleak Faith. I don't know if Mortal Shell was, like, before or, like, around that time. There's, like, a lot of Soulsborne-esque kind of, like... Yeah, Steel Rising. There's a bunch of those coming out. And this one was just, like, one of them, like, in the midst of all of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it was almost kind of like a joke, because we're looking through it, and I'm like... We saw it, and we both kind of chuckled to ourselves. And then
Like,
I'm like, I'm just downloading it, because, like, what is there to lose? Like, we play a little bit, see what happens. So I think that did play into...
The enjoyment
of it, because our expectations were pretty much non-existent. But, that being said, we downloaded it, started it up, and, like, 6 hours later...
We beat it.
And we're like, that was amazing.
Yeah.
That was a ton of fun.
It's a really focused game.
Yeah.
Like, shockingly focused. And I think, so, like, I didn't hear much about it, and I wonder how much... Like I don't know if you looked into... I didn't do this, unfortunately, but, like, I didn't really look into, like, reviews for it after we finished playing it or anything. But from what I do remember, like, I remember getting, like, okay scores. I remember it doing, like, all right.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I wonder how much of it is just like, oh, there's no voice lines. There's certain UI elements that you could tell are like...
They're more simple.
They're really simple.
Yeah.
It's like just like a free font that they got from like, you know, font directories and stuff like that. But I didn't mind that because you could tell the focus of the game was like the combat and all of that. And that they got like... really, really, really well. You know, like they did really good on the combat. Especially for it being like a game. Like I think there was only 7 developers working on it. There's only 7 people working on the game. And it's like, with all that in mind and all that, like it was very impressive.
Yeah, very small studio. This is their first product that they put out.
Yeah.
Developers are called Overboard Studios. And yeah, I mean... So I did look into the review scores. They're hovering around 6 to 7s, you know, on the higher end, you know, some 8s. But for the most part, it was pretty average, with a lot of people pointing out, a lot of reviewers pointing out what you pointed out, you know, and...
Yeah, there's like no voice acting at all.
It comes down to the expectations. So I want to say on PlayStation Plus, you pay like $25 for it. I think that's worth the price of entry, quite frankly. If you have PlayStation Plus, you can just download it. You know, that's part of it. You know,
so it's 25 like in the PlayStation Store to purchase.
Correct. Yes.
And then we got it for free for Plus.
Correct. And so it's one of those things that when you and I are playing it, because we were just, this was not during work like gameplay time.
We were just playing for fun.
We're just playing for fun, and we ended up downloading that, and literally an hour into it, you and I are like, we got to talk about this.
This is actually really good.
And the main reason being is that it hits a lot of the chords that you and I talk about, where it's focused, it's fun, it feels like a game. It doesn't feel like it's trying to be this huge cinematic thing. And granted, the approach is pretty clear. They wanted to put out, something that shows what they're capable of. Hopefully, raise enough money to make something bigger. It's from what I was gathering from my research. And so there are things where they did not pour resources into, like voice acting.
Yeah, there's like grunts and stuff, like death grunts and stuff like that are recorded, but like cutscenes and all that, it's literally just like a little subtext, like a little subtitle on the bottom.
Yeah, so stuff like that, but that's not to say that there's not production value in the game.
No, there's a lot.
So, for instance, like I would say that the graphics are actually pretty good. They're not mind blowing, but they are clean. They more than get the job done. There's actually a lot of art design to it that was a lot of fun to look at. And the score was actually really good.
Yeah, it was pretty good, yeah.
There was a couple boss themes that were really good, that like are still stuck in my head.
I actually want to play the game again, dude.
Yeah, so it's talking about it. It's fun. See, and that's the thing is that...
It was really fun. It was just a really good experience, like overall, in terms of gameplay and stuff like that. And like... that's really like all it needs to be. Like, I feel like there's a lot of games that it's like they're trying to do especially nowadays, they're trying to do so many things beyond like just the gameplay, that the gameplay ends up getting like pushed to the back, or they like settle for it being a little simpler, and then it just kind of suffers for that. And like this game was like literally the opposite of that. You could tell they're like, we don't need anything but gameplay to feel good. And like it's I think pretty abundantly clear when playing the game, like just looking around the world and stuff, you're like, you guys poured like 90% of your time into the gameplay, and it shows, because the game feels so good. Like, it's super kinetic. It's like there's a rhythm to it. It's like really satisfying when you like parry, because it's the way the game works is it's a lot like Sekiro, where you're like you can dodge, but you could tell the game wants you to be more like in the fight with the clashing of the swords.
It's more aggressive.
Yeah, it's more aggressive. It's more aggressive, and like basically the way it works is like as you're attacking people with your sword, like you do a little bit of damage onto their health, but then you do plague damage, where basically it'll mark part of their health bar green, but it doesn't take the health away. It just marks it. And then when you do an attack with your claw, because you have like a claw, it's like you're like a plague doctor or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. When you do an attack with your claw, it'll basically like damage all of that. It'll take away all of that plague damage that you added onto the enemy. And so it's this thing where it's like you're kind of like, you're fighting, at least with normal enemies, you're like fighting them, and you get into the rhythm, and you're like fighting them, and you're like either like parrying to do like plague damage, because when you parry, it also does some damage. It adds like that plague effect onto their health bar. And so you're like parrying to do that, but then you're also like attacking them to get their whole bar green, because you can keep fighting them and like through that and not use your claw, and it'll take a while, and like you can kill them that way. But really what you want to do is like fight them, get their whole bar green, and then just attack them once with your claw, and then they're like dead. And so you get into this little rhythm of like, you're just like, it felt like you were playing with the posture, like in Sekiro. That's why I keep like referring it to that, because it's definitely more aggressive. It's definitely like really focused on like the parries and all of that. There are also like almost like visceral kind of like attack animations.
Well, a key thing to mention too is, so because you're inflicting wounds, is what's happening, and then that's where that green is, and then you use your claw. That's the plague damage to
there you go,
to actually kill them. If you don't do that after a short period of time, if you don't inflict some sort of damage onto the enemy, then they start healing up that portion that's green. And so there's an incentive to be aggressive,
hit them with your claw when you can.
Hit away at the main health, so that way you can unlock the wounds and then actually finish them off. Yeah. And so there is like this very interesting like dynamic that occurs where you end up becoming way more aggressive, and in that finding like these really fast rhythms and really like quick like kill loops, and which make it so fun, where you're like, man, like, So they have this other mechanic where with the claw you can do like your normal damage, or you can like charge it up and then like take one of the weapons, like a
Yes.
plague weapon from any enemy. And every enemy has a different plague weapon. So there's some people that are, using bows. Some enemies are using like axes and stuff. And it really functions a lot in a lot of different ways, kind of like a Dawn of Sorrow or an Aria of Sorrow, where
you got the soul.
you've got the souls, yeah. And so what ends up happening is you end up unlocking like these skill shards from these enemies, and it utilizes like their either it's their, like the axe, or like there's like these Reaper characters that had like actual scythes, and you unlock like an additional weapon that you can use in like perpetuity. Yeah. So when you take it with the claw, you can use it like one time, and then you'd have to take it again, like suction it off of them or whatever. And then the once you get those skill shards from actually killing them, you can actually equip that and use it whenever you want, so long as it's like off a cooldown. And so there's this whole other meta game where you're like, okay, well, like what weapons work well with the other ones, and like what is good to like stagger an enemy. Like you and I found that greatsword enemy, and after we finally killed him, we got his skill shards. And we had that equipped for like the rest of the game because
it was so good.
Because there's so many enemies where like if they were coming at you, you just swing the greatsword and then they all get staggered and you can finish them off.
It was good against bosses too. Like certain bosses were staggering with that one. For those who don't know, by the way, Dawn of Sorrow is a Castlevania game.
Yeah.
And you kill enemies, you get their soul, and then you can like use one of their abilities.
Yeah.
So that I just figured we'll mention that just for those who
for you in the back.
Yeah, for those who don't know that's like a Castlevania, but that's what it's from. But yeah, the game is just so satisfying, dude. And like one thing I really want to like commend them for is something that we talked about with the Lords of the Fallen and stuff, is like a lot of people will try to, or a lot of devs will try to come into this like genre, and like it's hard to make these games in a way where they feel fair and in a way where they're actually not broken. And I feel like a lot of devs will come in, and instead of making a game that's like maybe like not as hard as they initially planned, but like they're able to like work out and figure out how to do these things right, they try to make it like harder than like the current FromSoft game that came out. And I'm like, dude, FromSoft's been doing this kind of game for like a decade.
They're closer to two at this point.
Closer to two at this point. Like they know which boundaries to break and not, and which ones to not, in order to make it like feel fair.
Like simulate proper fairness.
Yeah, and to do that, and they know how to do that, and they know which things not to push with.
Yeah.
For instance, like boss runs, they're like, okay, like most FromSoft games, like Miyazaki directed, and I say that because Dark Souls 2 does not follow this at all, but he didn't direct it. But if like most of the Miyazaki directed like FromSoft games, like if there's a really hard boss, like mechanically really hard boss, they're super aggressive, they've got really small parry windows, like stuff like that. They usually have a really short run, because like when a boss is really hard and then you have a long run, it's just not fun.
Yeah.
Oh, it's super hard. This and then you can get into the whole like masochistic side of things that like tends to come out, that whole conversation with these games.
Yep.
But it's just not fun. Like the reality is it's not, and like some people might have that fun, might find like, enjoyment in that, and to each their own. But like for the mass majority, it's just not fun. And then if there's like a super easy boss, they'll usually give that one a longer run, because it's like you might die like once to it, but then you might die a few times in the run, and then that's like part of the challenge of the boss.
It's almost like there's like a balance to this.
Yeah, there's a balance to it. Like you get an easy boss, all right, you're gonna have to do the work in the run. You have a really hard boss, all right, don't worry about the run, just keep focusing on the boss. Yeah. And a lot of games, and like Lords of the Fallen did this too a lot, where it's like they won't follow that because they're like trying to make the game harder, and they're trying to jump into this genre and make it harder than the games that are being made by the people who like created the genre. And it ends up like there ends up being parts of the game design that just feel wrong, or they just don't feel right, or it's just not fun, or it feels like they're just, again, like I've just been describing, like, it feels like they're pushing it too hard for barely coming in with no experience on how to make these games. And I really commend the devs with like Thymesea, because like you could tell they focused on the mechanics, they focused on the combat, they focused on like making that feel kinetic and having like a good rhythm, and having like the rule set for these like this combat system to like make sense and have like a risk reward factor. And when it comes to the bosses, you could tell they like focused on like pushing them and making them like as hard as they could while still making it doable.
Yeah.
And there's like no runs in the game.
It's almost like they decide at the beginning where they're like,
we need to focus on these things.
we're going to make the environments fun to traverse.
Yeah.
We're going to make them cool to look at. We're going to make them fun for the combat, and then we're going to push the combat at the bosses, and no, we're not doing runs.
Yeah.
Like, it was like a very clear decision that they made, because every single boss run
was
more of like a boss like trot like over to you. You're just like, doom, doom, and then you're there.
Yeah.
Which is great, you know, and
it's to its strength.
It comes down to approach, because a lot of these developers will come to it and go like, that's what makes Dark Souls so great, right? Is how hard it is. And I'm like, no, it doesn't. What
more nuanced
it is hard because they approached it to make it engaging and to make it feel a certain way. So for Sekiro, it's like the clashing of swords. You know, Bloodborne, it's like they want it to feel like a dance. So you're dancing with these monsters and these beasts, and yeah, it is hard, but that's not the approach they had. Dark Souls 2, that was the approach, funnily enough. And I remember the marketing for that back in like 2011
Prepare to Die.
Or 2013.
I think it was Prepare to Die.
It was Prepare to Die, yeah. And it was
like the marketing.
It was like, okay, Dark Souls 1 did so well. We need to pump out a second one. And they immediately got to work on it. Miyazaki was not heading that.
He was working on Bloodborne.
He was actually working on Bloodborne at that point. And I remember a buddy of mine at my job at the time, he was telling me, man, I'm so excited, and it's supposed to be so difficult, and I'm like, I'm really excited about that. And I remember him playing it. He's like, when he started playing it, I would ask him like, hey, so how was it Dark Souls 2? He's like, it's good. He goes, it's really difficult. He goes, but yeah, it's good. And we never really not as enthused about it. Yeah, and a lot of developers will approach games thinking that these Dark Souls kind of games are just hard. And you know, Thymesea, the developers overboard, like clearly understood the assignment that they were giving themselves, and they're like, it's not to make this difficult. You can tell they designed it based off of, okay, how do we want this combat system to feel, and it feels great. It's a lot of fun.
I really like
it. And they were very strategic about how they invested their time and their resources. You can tell. They're like, okay, we're not going to put a ton into the story, but we'll put enough. It was like little things you read, and you know, if you take the time to read,
like, you'll find like a little poster and it has like a couple sentences.
Yeah, and it's cool.
You're like, oh, this is I'm in a circus.
Yeah, and like, oh, this is like the theme that's going on, or okay, like this area here is like where all of the people that have this whole plague are like sent down, and there's stuff there, but that's definitely not in depth like the way that a Bloodborne or a From Software is, or even a Lords of the Fallen. Lords of the Fallen is much more involved
way more
with that.
world building. Yeah.
That being said, it's again, and it bears repeating, like it is not full priced. Okay, it is a shorter game. Okay, if you have PlayStation Plus, you can get it for free. It's part of your membership already. And it's a short game. It took us like 6, maybe 7 hours to beat.
Yeah, there's only like 4 bosses in the game.
Yeah, and I want to say that there's some different variations of those bosses if you do the side missions that they have. Yeah. But that being said, like, it really checks a lot of the boxes for things that I'm looking for in games nowadays, where I'm not saying I'm not going to play a longer game or an open world game or something like that. It really comes down to the quality of it. Is it worth my time to sit there and invest in that, because I'm going to be playing this one for a while? Generally speaking, I want things that are more focused and more contained, and this was that, and so highly recommend the game, especially if you have PlayStation Plus. It's kind of something you already have access to. So just download it and check it out. If you don't like it, you don't like it. Hey, that's cool. But I think you'll have a lot of fun with it. It's a very snappy game, and the combat loops are just a lot of fun, and the bosses are a blast too. I think the best thing I can say about the game is that there wasn't one single time that I died where I was like, that wasn't fair, that wasn't my fault. I learned something every death where I'm like, okay, I need to like get my timing right, or like,
slow down so just a little bit.
Like, that doesn't work. I should be doing this. I should probably use that wepen because that one takes too long to wind up. And it's
really gotta hit that feather on this one.
Yeah, exactly. There really was like nothing that was unfair about it. So great job, Overboard. I know that came out in 2022. I don't know how many people talked about it then, but hey, you know what? We figured we'd want to shed some light on this, and if we can get some more people playing it, great. That'd be awesome. Because it's worth the time. Yeah, absolutely.
The game's just, it really impressed me, especially for how we found it and all that. It's so focused, and like, again, there's like games with much bigger dev teams that are like trying to make these kinds of like in this genre, like the Soulsborne kind of games, where it's like it's so easy to get lost in the sauce. I think when you're like just looking at like what FromSoft makes like at face value, kind of to what you're saying, where it's like the thing people walk away with typically, oh, they're just really hard games, and it's like, but why are they hard? You know, like few people I feel like ask that question when they're like going in to make these, where it's like, well, why are they hard? And a lot of times the reason why they're hard is just because like it is a different kind of mentality. Like most games, it's like, oh, learn that enemy and then just go kill it, and then go from point A to point B and do the objective. See, it says it right here on the little mission marker. Like just do the objective, and like FromSoft games are like they make you like at least you learn when you see something new that you don't know. You're like, okay, let me approach it like kind of carefully. Mm-hmm. Like let me not just run in and try to shoot it. Let me just like or try to hit it or whatever. Let me try to throw a rock over there and get its attention and like drag it away from all the other enemies that it's near. And like you
can throw a feather.
yeah, and you like kind of learn how to do that. And like it's pretty clear that these devs like, you know, they put their focus on one thing, which was the combat, and like yeah, they did understand like a shockingly large amount of like those nuances and stuff. The game's really good. I really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Well, we both highly recommend it.
Yes.
Definitely check it out. But yeah, this has been a fun one.
It's a very fun one. Yeah.
It was a fun discovery. We figured we want to share that with you as soon as possible.
Yep.
So thank you for joining us on the games. This has been Two Souls, and we'll see you next time.